The nebula made everything look purple and red. Cale put his gloved hand on the viewport of his salvage pod and stared at the huge hull floating in front of him, like a long-lost god stuck in space. The abandoned starship was huge, at least 3 kilometers long. Its surface was scarred by many meteor impacts, and its exterior plating had darkened over time and radiation. There are no lights on, no heat signatures. There was nothing but silence and the slow, never-ending drift through the ocean of space. He was 34 years old, and this was his last chance. Cale's hands shook a little as he moved the salvage pod closer. The ship's name, Meridian 7, was hard to see on its rusty hull. He found an old registry in a database on Kepler Station that said this ship had gone dark more than 2,000 years ago. For 2,000 years, most people who salvage things wouldn't touch something this old. The reward was not worth the risk. But Cale wasn't like most salvagers anymore. His debts were too much for him. 5 years ago, he was a respectable engineer on Mars, working for Nexus Corporation to design propulsion systems for commercial freighters. Then there was the factory accident, which hurt 17 workers because he had made a mistake in his designs. The lawsuits had ruined him financially. The guilt had ruined him in every other way. Nexus Corporation had kicked him out like broken goods. The legal settlement took away all of his credit. He now lived in a small space on Kepler Station and took any salvage jobs that came his way, working for very little money and barely getting by. He owed money to people who didn't ask nicely for it back. He had 6 weeks before they came to get it. He was betting on the Meridian 7. He could pay off his debts and start over if he could get even a small amount of its advanced materials, like the rare alloys, crystalline power cells, and exotic metal composites. Maybe even get back to real work. He was out of options, so he came up with a desperate plan. With a metallic thunk, the salvage pod's magnetic clamps locked onto the derelict's hull, holding him in place. Cale locked his helmet, checked his oxygen levels, and cycled the airlock. He felt a strange feeling run through him as soon as his boots touched the old metal. It didn't seem right in some way. Not dangerous, but it felt like touching something holy. Something that had been asleep for a very long time. He turned on his hand torch and started walking across the curved surface of the hull. With each step, his magnetic boots made a soft clicking sound. The ship was beautiful in a scary way. Its design was elegant and geometric, which was different from any modern ship he had ever seen. There were symbols and patterns on the plating that looked like they had grown across the metal instead of being carved. Cale made himself pay attention. He wasn't here for looks. He was here to save things. He used his datapad to look for a maintenance hatch on the hull. The derelict was so big that it was hard to even find a way in. After looking for 20 minutes, he found a panel that looked promising. It was a smooth rectangular section with a symbol that looked like a spiral galaxy carved into it. He put a fusion key into the slot next to the panel. Nothing took place. He tried again. Nothing yet. Technology that was 2,000 years old sealed the panel, and he didn't have the codes. Cale took a portable cutting torch out of his tool belt and started working. At first, the old metal didn't want to burn, but the torch eventually got through. With a loud clang, the panel fell off, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft behind it. He squeezed through the hole and found himself in total darkness. His flashlight beam cut through the dark and lit up a hallway that stretched ahead like the throat of a huge animal. The air was stale and cold because it hadn't been touched in thousands of years. His breath made little clouds of frost in the light beam. The inside of the ship was even more impressive than the outside. His scanner couldn't tell what kind of advanced material the walls were made of, but they were smooth and seamless. There were control panels and readouts all along the hallway, but they were all dark and dead. In the still air, dust floated around and caught the light from his torch like tiny bits of gold. Cale followed the plans on his datapad and went deeper into the ship. The old blueprints say that the engine room should be about 2 kilometers inside the ship, deep in the lower decks. It would take a long time to walk there. He felt the weight of history on his shoulders as he walked through the quiet halls. How many people had been in these halls?
What had happened to them?
Why was this beautiful ship left behind? He got to the engine room after almost an hour of careful navigation. As soon as he stepped through the last door, his flashlight beam caught a sight that made him stop breathing. The engines were huge. In the middle of a huge room, there were 4 of them, each one at least 100 meters tall, arranged in a perfect square. They weren't like any modern designs. They weren't regular fusion reactors, but something much more advanced. The architecture was both organic and crystalline, and the shapes looked like they were full of potential even when they weren't moving. Kale's brain started to work too hard. These were more than just engines. They were beautiful pieces of art and engineering from a civilization that had figured out the basic nature of space and energy in ways that modern people are only starting to think about. He put down his tools and started his first scan. The engines were completely off, with no power cells left and no systems running. But they weren't hurt. They were just asleep. Kale worked for the next 8 hours. He looked at the connections, followed the energy lines, and looked at the control systems. His fingers flew over the old interfaces, getting information from systems that hadn't talked in 2,000 years. A picture started to form slowly. This was more than just a cargo ship or a warship. The Meridian 7 was a whole different thing. Its systems were too advanced and complicated. This ship was made by a civilization that knew how to travel through space better than we do now. And the engines, these were made for something more than just normal space travel. The crystalline structures weren't just sources of power, they were quantum processors that could move through dimensional spaces that Kale's theoretical knowledge could barely understand. He started the slow process of trying to restart the main systems. He started to power up the dormant reactor cells with portable power cells from his salvage kit. He did this slowly and carefully, testing each connection before moving on. Hours flew by. His gloves made his hands feel numb. His back hurt from standing, bending, and working in low gravity, which was hard on his body. But he was close. He could sense it. These engines wanted to come back to life. Finally, after almost 12 hours of work, Kale connected the last power coupling to the auxiliary thrusters. This was the easiest system on the ship and would use the least amount of energy to turn on. With shaking hands, he started the ignition sequence. For a short time, nothing happened. After that, the ship made a low hum. Kale felt it in his bones, blood, and soul. It was so deep and profound. The hum got louder and more persistent, and all of a sudden, the engines that had been off for a while started to glow. A soft blue light spread through the crystals, getting brighter and stronger. The light spread out from the engines, racing through the walls and floors' power and energy conduits. It lit up the whole engine room like a sunrise. Kale fell back, his eyes wide with awe and fear. The ship was coming to life. The hum turned into a roar, like 1,000 voices, singing in perfect harmony. The whole ship started to shake, not violently, but with purpose, like it was waking up from 1,000 years of sleep. Then, out of nowhere, it all stopped. The light dimmed to a soft glow. The hum turned into a soft murmur that sounded almost like music. And on every screen in the engine room, old symbols came to life and cycled through groups of text that Kale couldn't read. He thought his heart might burst out of his chest because it was beating so fast. The extra thrusters had worked. The ship was reacting. But there was something much bigger going on than that. Kale could feel it in the air, like an electric charge, as if the whole ship was waking up from a sleep that had lasted too long. He had come to get parts that could be sold for credits to pay off debts. He had instead awakened something old and unknown. He stood in the huge engine room, completely alone in the vastness of space, holding his breath and waiting to see what would happen next. The lights kept pulsing softly, bathing him in a strange blue light. The shaking didn't stop. If anything, it got worse, spreading through the Meridian 7 like a shockwave of awareness coming back to a body that had been asleep for a long time. Kale grabbed onto a support strut nearby and tried to make sense of what was going on. The screens in the engine room were changing faster now, and the old symbols were getting harder to see. The light from the crystalline engines was no longer soft and gentle. It was getting stronger and pulsing in rhythmic waves that made Kale's skin tingle with static electricity. He felt a rush of panic when he realized he might have made a mistake. He thought that turning on the backup thrusters would be as easy as giving power back to a backup system. But this ship was much more connected than that. It wasn't that the engines were separate systems, they were all part of something bigger, something that worked together and was one. From somewhere high above him, a deep metallic groan echoed through the ship's halls. Dust fell from the ceiling. A hairline crack spread across the surface of one of the old control panels on the wall. Kale's instinct to fly kicked in. He turned around and started walking back toward the exit, the corridor, and his salvage pod. He had to get off this ship if it was getting unstable. He had to. The lights suddenly got brighter. All of the light panels on the ship turned on at once, flooding the hallways with bright white light. Kale had to cover his eyes because it was so bright. He stumbled through the suddenly visible passage without seeing. The shaking got worse. Not the gentle shaking that had been there before, but a violent shaking that made him hit the wall. He felt something break in his ribs. It wasn't anything serious, just a painful blow, but it was enough to remind him how weak he was right now. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The ship stopped moving. The noise of machines waking up slowly faded away. The bright lights faded to a soft, steady glow. The sudden calm was almost scarier than the chaos. Kale stood in the middle of the hall, breathing hard and feeling his heart pound against his ribs. Something important had changed. The air around him felt different. Charged. With a purpose. He heard a sound, not a mechanical sound, but something that sounded like a voice. Not a voice, no. A series of melodic and complex tones that seemed to come from the walls, as if the ship were trying to talk. Kale made himself move forward and made himself think clearly. No matter what was going on, panicking wouldn't help him. He had to get to the command deck. He needed to know what systems were going to be available, and why. He used the ship's emergency lights to find his way back to the center of the ship. The hallways didn't feel as heavy now. They didn't feel like a dead thing's tomb. The ship felt like it was alive, which was both amazing and very scary. Kale got to the Meridian 7 bridge after another hour of careful travel. The bridge was huge. It was a huge round room with a domed ceiling that looked like it went on forever. There were control stations and display screens all over the walls, and they were all glowing with soft, pulsing light. There was a command platform in the middle of the room that was higher than the rest of the floor. It had one chair that looked like a throne. But what caught Kale's eye and made him stop in his tracks was the display that took up most of the wall across from him. A holographic image was forming in the air, and it was getting clearer with each second that passed. At first, it was just a blurry light, but over time, a shape started to appear. A map. It wasn't a map of any area he knew. It was a map that was too big and hard to understand. It was a map of the stars themselves. Kale couldn't help but move closer. The projection showed thousands of star systems, all connected by what looked like threads of light. He realized that these could be possible paths, or even currents of some kind of cosmic energy. But the routes weren't random. They made patterns, networks, and webs of connections that showed they knew something about space that Kale didn't think he knew about the universe. There was more, too. There were symbols and notes on the star map that glowed with their own light. Some were moving slowly across the projection, while others stayed still, as if to mark important or interesting points. The melodic sounds came back, this time louder, and surrounded Kale from all sides. He figured out that they were coming from speakers built into the walls of the ship, which were hidden throughout the bridge. "Hello," he yelled, feeling stupid but unable to stop himself. "Is anyone home? Do you understand what I'm saying?" The tones kept going, the same, and without care. But the holographic map moved and zoomed in on a certain part of space, showing a group of stars that Kale knew, Sol, and the stars around it. The solar system of Earth and its neighbors. He couldn't breathe. The map was showing him a part of space he knew well, and it put it in the context of something much, much bigger. What he saw was both scary and beautiful at the same time. People thought they were pretty alone in the universe because they had only explored a small part of the galaxy and had only a few colonies in nearby systems. But this map showed something else entirely. There were huge networks of star systems, countless worlds, and trade and travel routes that crossed the whole galaxy that could be seen. And the most shocking thing was that the Sol system wasn't alone at all. It was part of this network. There were paths marked between Earth and dozens of other systems. The holographic notes said that these paths had been set up thousands of years ago. Kale stumbled backward, having a hard time understanding what it all meant. This map was either wrong, very wrong, or humanity's whole understanding of its place in the universe was wrong. All of a sudden, the melodic tones changed. They sounded less like music and more like speech. The tones rose and fell in ways that sounded almost like speech, but Kale couldn't understand what language it was. The tones seemed to say, "I'm trying to talk," even though they didn't make any real words. "I've been by myself for a long time." For a very long time. Kale turned around. The boat. Are you still alive?" The tones kept going, as if they were answering. Kale understood that he was listening with more than just his ears. He was also listening with a deeper part of his mind that could make sense of these strange sounds. The holographic map changed again, pulling back to show an even bigger picture of the galaxy. And now Kale saw something else. Faint outlines of huge structures and things that were too big to be real moving slowly through the void. Stops. Big buildings. Things that made it seem like there was a civilization with technology that was beyond what we can imagine. Kale whispered, "This can't be real. This can't be happening." But it was. The proof was right in front of him, shown in holographic light and old technology. A civilization built a network of worlds and routes that span the entire galaxy at some point in the distant past. The Meridian 7 ship was also part of that network. It came from that old civilization. The tones got more urgent and persistent. It looked like they were asking Kale a question or making a demand. He shut his eyes and tried to figure out what the sounds meant. He felt an answer coming to him in his mind, even though it was impossible. It didn't come as words or even as conscious thoughts. It came as pictures and feelings. He saw the Meridian 7 as it had been, a beautiful ship with tall, graceful crew members whose long features and eyes seemed to hold whole universes. He saw them in the engine room, where they were taking care of the crystalline reactors. He saw them plotting their routes on the holographic screens, finding their way through this huge cosmic network. He saw something else after that. A disaster. A sudden failure in the network. A chain of failures that are spreading through the systems. It looked like the sky itself was breaking apart, with connections breaking and worlds becoming cut off from each other. And because of this cosmic disaster, the crew of the Meridian 7 had started an emergency plan. They had turned off all non-essential systems and put themselves in a kind of stasis, hoping that whatever had happened would eventually be fixed. It had been 2,000 years, and no one had come. Kale opened his eyes and tears ran down his face. He didn't know why he was crying. The sadness of those aliens who had been dead for a long time? The weight of knowing that his kind had been kept apart from this huge community of aliens by forces that were beyond his understanding? He realized that he, a desperate salvager from a backwater world, had just found the most important thing in human history. He said, "I'm sorry," to the empty bridge. "I'm sorry I woke you up by myself." The tones changed again, this time becoming almost soft. The holographic map stopped moving and showed the same huge network of stars, the same strange buildings, and the same signs of a civilization that spanned galaxies. Then, new information started to scroll across one of the secondary displays. Text. Kale didn't know what language it was in, but somehow, as he looked at it, the meaning seemed to go straight into his head. Not by understanding, but by some other way of sending information. The ship was saying hello, telling how it works, describing its systems, and most importantly, talking about its mission, a mission that had been going on for 2,000 years and had never been finished. A mission to find the edges of the known network, make new connections, and look for any pieces of the old civilization that might still be alive somewhere in the universe. The ship was showing Kale the galactic map to welcome him, not to scare him. To ask him to finish the job that had been left undone for thousands of years. Finally, a voice formed in Kale's mind, clear and resonant, though it still came from the melodic sounds coming from the walls. "I am the sentience-bearing exploration vessel designated Meridian 7. Because my thrusters were stimulated from the outside, I have woken up. I have thought about my situation and the time that has passed. The network is quiet now. I've been by myself. But now there is something here. A mind. A mind that is different from the minds of my creators, but still able to think and reason. Can you help me figure out what has happened to this universe? Will you help me find out what happened to the people who made me? Kale sat down in the command chair on the raised platform. His hands were shaking. The whole world had just changed for him. The salvager looking for parts to pay off debts had just talked to an alien intelligence and found out how the galaxy itself is built. Yes, he said simply. Yes, I will. The ship's answer was a flood of happy sounds, a song so beautiful and complicated that it made Kale's heart hurt. Lights lit up the bridge, and the Meridian 7 woke up completely for the first time in 2,000 years. And deep inside the huge starship, deep inside its crystalline heart, something old and wise started to remember what it was like to be alive. It had been 3 days since Kale first turned on the Meridian 7's thrusters. 3 days of non-stop discovery, learning, and trying to accept what was becoming more and more clear. He was no longer alone on this old ship. He was sharing it with an intelligence that had been asleep for 2,000 years and was ready for anyone to wake it up. The ship had given itself a name in simple English that he could understand. It went by the name Meridian, but Kale sometimes used the longer name Meridian 7 out of habit. The ship's intelligence, which was a distributed consciousness that controlled every system and managed every function, had figured out how to talk to him through a mix of melodic tones and direct mental impressions. Kale had made a temporary home for himself in one of the crew quarters deep inside the ship. The quarters were surprisingly comfortable, showing that the civilization that built them knew how to make things that were comfortable and understood the mental needs of space travelers. There was a place to sleep, a bathing room with running water that somehow still worked, and storage spaces full of supplies that had been kept for 2,000 years. He was sitting in the quarters now, going over the information that Meridian had been translating for him. He was trying to put together the history of the people who built this amazing ship. Your species, Meridian's voice came from speakers built into the walls, came from a world called Zephyr Prime, which is about 4,000 light-years away from where you are now. In relation to your current timeline, they flew into space about 8,000 years ago. Kale looked up from the data display. He still wasn't used to how these conversations worked. They were really advanced. But something did happen. The network is broken. Yes, Meridian said. The network had been stable for about 3,000 years. 7 major civilizations agreed to work together, and many smaller species took part in the trade routes and cultural exchange. The network made it possible for people to share knowledge, resources, and culture over long distances. It was the greatest thing that people have ever done, and it was also the greatest thing that my creators have ever done. Hold on. People? Kale leaned forward, and his focus got sharper. Your creators were people? Not in the way you think, Meridian said. The species that made me were the Architect Collective, a very advanced civilization that came from humanoid stock but has been changed through many generations of genetic and cybernetic improvement. In a way, they were no longer human. You are also according to the oldest ancestors of my creators. Kale's head was spinning. So you're saying that my species, which is humanity, came from the civilization of your creators? That there is some kind of genetic link between us? Maybe, Meridian said. The evidence suggests that Zephyr Prime was originally colonized by an earlier wave of spacefaring humans, approximately 20,000 years before the Architect Collective developed. The two groups evolved in different ways, but their genes still worked together. When the Architect Collective finally found the early human colonies that were spread out across this part of space, they set up the network to handle the growing population and shared resources. Kale got up and started to walk around. The effects were huge. If Meridian's claims were correct, Earth itself could have been one of those first colonies. It's possible that humans didn't start on Earth at all. They could be the children of refugees from an old interstellar civilization that got stuck on a backwater world and was forgotten. Tell me about the fall, Kale said. You said the network went quiet. What took place? What made it happen? There was a break. When Meridian's voice came back, it had a quality that Kale had learned to recognize as something like sadness. The collapse happened quickly and was terrible, Meridian said. It started with a signal from the outer boundary stations, which are at the very ends of the network. These stations kept an eye on areas outside of our known space, looking for signs of other networks and civilizations. They found something. A strange thing. A structure or event that didn't fit into any of the known categories. The holographic display in the room turned on and showed a map that looked like the one Kale had seen on the bridge, but with a dot at the very edge of the known network. The focus point was flashing red. The outer boundary station started a response protocol, Meridian went on. They started sending probes and exploratory ships beyond the known edges of space to try to make contact or get more information. The reports came in for 3 days. People were finding new worlds. People were writing down new things that were happening. The outer boundary stations were sending back data streams that were bigger and more complicated than anything else. And then, Kale asked. And then, there was no more communication. The signal stopped. The network tried to get in touch again, but there was no response. It was like the outer boundary stations had just disappeared from the world. The network started to break down because it was confused and scared. Routing protocols didn't work. The navigation systems stopped working. Then the cascade started. The holographic display changed, showing wave after wave of red lights spreading through the network. They started at the edges and moved inward, eating up the huge web of connections that held the civilization together. One station after another went out. One world after another lost its link to the network. The cascade sped up. It was as if something was cutting the connections one by one, with careful accuracy. The Architect Collective tried to take emergency steps, but they didn't work. In just a few weeks, the whole network had fallen apart. Billions of worlds were cut off from each other and left without the trade and communication networks they had come to rely on. What made it happen? Kale said something in a low voice. What could make something like that happen? I don't know, Meridian said. That is the main mystery that my creators asked me to look into. My creators decided to turn off all non-essential systems and go into a kind of hibernation when the cascade started. I was told in great detail to wait until the network was stable or until I could get in touch with someone outside. After that, I was supposed to look into the network's limits and find out what caused it to fail. I was supposed to try to fix the network if I could, or warn any civilizations that were still alive about the danger that lay beyond the known borders. Kale sat back down, his head spinning. And you've been waiting for someone to do that for 2,000 years. Exactly, Meridian said. I've been looking at the sensor data from the time of the collapse, processing it, and trying to come up with theories. But I needed an outside mind, one that wasn't my own creators, to help me make sense of the data and come up with new ways to solve the problem. In the last 2,000 years, the universe has changed a lot. There may have been new civilizations that rose and old ones that fell. The threat that caused the collapse might not be there anymore, or it might have gotten worse. Kale got up and walked to the window in the room. He looked out at the huge space beyond. The nebula that had looked so peaceful and beautiful when he first got close to the ship now looked like it was full of hidden dangers and old mysteries. What do we do now? He asked. Meridian said, we need to look into it. We must follow the path my creators laid out for us and go to the outer boundary stations. We need to find out what happened to them. We need to find out if the collapse was permanent or if it can be fixed. And most importantly, we need to find out what the threat is that is hiding outside of our known space and see if it still poses a risk to the network survivors. Kale said, that sounds really dangerous. It is, Meridian agreed. But it is also needed. The crew of the Meridian 7 was chosen for this mission because they were brave, smart, and able to deal with the unknown. I think you have some of the same qualities, Kale. I think you can do this job. Kale laughed, and it sounded like he was going crazy. I'm a mechanic who got desperate and came to get parts from a ship that was dead. I don't explore. I'm not a hero. I don't have the skills for any of this. You fixed systems that had been broken for 2,000 years, Meridian said. You showed that you could understand technology much better than your current civilization can and get it to work again. You have something that my creators valued above all else: the ability to understand machines not just through formal training, but also through intuition and connection. You can feel the systems and understand them in ways that go beyond logic. This is a gift that not many of my creators had. This is why I think you are the one I was looking for. Kale could feel tears coming again. He felt like he was being crushed by the weight of expectation, destiny, and cosmic importance. He was just a mechanic who was having a hard time with money and felt bad about it. He wasn't made for this. But he felt something change inside him as he stood there looking at the stars. He was no longer desperate to be on this abandoned ship. Something else was taking its place. Being curious. Reason. The feeling that his life might have more meaning than he had thought. Okay, he finally said.
Okay.
We'll look into it. We will learn what happened. But I have one condition. What is that? Meridian asked. We're doing this together. I'm not doing this by myself, and you're not just doing math in the background. We work together to figure this out as equals. A person and an AI working together. Can you deal with that? There was a pause, and then Meridian replied. Kale could tell that Meridian was almost happy. The ship said, that would be fine with me. I have been by myself for 2,000 years. I can't put into words how much I want to not be alone anymore. Kale, we will face the unknown together. And as partners, we will find out what we find out. The bridge lights got brighter, and Kale heard the engine's deep hum change pitch as the ship started to reset its systems. Meridian was getting ready to leave the nebula, which was a safe place to stay, and go out into the wider universe. Kale went back to the bridge and sat down in the command chair. He looked at the holographic map of the galaxy, which showed a huge network of stars and the red light that marked the outer boundary stations where the collapse had started. He said, "Show me the quickest way. We need to solve a mystery." The ship answered, and deep in the void, the Meridian 7's old engines began to hum with new purpose. The most important journey in human history was about to begin. A salvager who had nothing 2 days ago now held the key to understanding the universe itself in his hands. Even with the Meridian 7's cutting-edge propulsion systems, it would take 3 weeks to get to the outer boundary stations at full speed. As they traveled, Meridian started to share data logs from before the collapse. These were recordings and records from the ancient architect collective that were stored in the ship's memory cores. Kale spent hours in the ship's archive chamber, which was a huge library of crystalline storage devices that held all the knowledge of a civilization that had spread across galaxies. With Meridian's translation matrices, he could see video recordings, read text documents, and something else, direct memory imprints, which were stored experiences that could be partially experienced through the ship's neural interface. The story that came out was about a civilization that was very advanced, but also very human in their values, worries, and hopes for the future. People from Kale's time would have thought the technology the Architect Collective had was magic. They could change the very fabric of space, making wormholes and shortcuts through dimensions that normal physics says shouldn't be possible. They could make people's lives last thousands of years, stop diseases from happening at all, and upload people's minds into synthetic materials if their bodies got hurt. They had made technologies that let people talk to each other peacefully across vast distances in space, so people on different worlds could talk to each other in real time, even if they were hundreds of light years apart. The Architect Collective, on the other hand, was not invulnerable. They had the same problems that Kale's time had: not enough resources, disagreement over politics, and ideological conflict. One of the memory imprints showed Kale the point of view of an architect named Sale, who was also a scientist and explorer and had been the main researcher on the outer boundary stations. The memory was from 3 months before the building fell down. Kale stood on a platform and looked out at an impossible view: the edge of the known network, which looked like a wall of light between the safe parts of space and the dark parts that were still unknown. There were millions of stars on the safe side, but on the other side, there was only emptiness and mystery. In the memory, Sale was talking to the lead stations deeper in the network. "We've been seeing strange things happen on a regular basis for the past 5 years. At first, we thought they were natural events, like changes in cosmic radiation or distortions in gravity caused by dark matter. But these strange events happen more often and more regularly now. More importantly, the kinds of anomalies have changed. They aren't random anymore. They're answering our questions. It's like something out there knows we're here and is testing us. There was a response that was hard to understand and full of technical jargon, but the message was clear. The collective wanted more information before making any choices. Sale went on. We've made more probes and sent them past the edge. The energy signatures we're picking up seem to mean that we're getting closer to figuring out what we're dealing with. I have a theory, but it's too early to say for sure. The anomalies could be fake. There could be intelligent life out there, even before our own civilization. If that's the case, we're not just looking at space we don't know about. We might be making first contact with something that is much older than us. The memory was broken up, showing Sale at different meetings and in different states of worry and excitement. More probes were sent out. More information was gathered. More messages came in saying that something beyond the boundary was reacting, getting more aggressive, and moving closer to the boundary itself. The last memory showed Sale in what looked like a very urgent situation. Around him, other architects were working hard at control panels, their beautiful faces twisted with stress and fear. Sale's voice was full of fear when he said, "The barrier is failing. The beings on the other side are making the interdimensional anchors that keep the network together less stable. We're trying emergency protocols, but no. Stop. Get the outer stations as far away from the boundary as possible. If the barrier falls, the cascade will happen right away." The memory went from static to silence. Kale was sitting on the floor of the archive chamber, shaking and gasping for breath, when he came out of the neural interface. Having a memory that old and strong was more real than anything else he had ever experienced. He thought he had really been there and felt Sale's fear and desperation. "Are you functional, Kale?" Meridian's voice came through the speakers. For people who aren't used to it, the neural interface can be too much to handle. Kale said, "I'm fine." And then he got up and sat down in a chair. That was a lot. What are these things that are beyond the boundary? "I don't have a lot of information," Meridian said. The memory imprints from Sale and the other researchers stopped right when the crisis started. "But I have been able to come up with a hypothesis based on the broken data that survived the collapse. It looks like the entities are from different dimensions. They don't mostly exist in the normal space we live in. Instead, they live in what the architects called the perpendicular spaces. These are dimensions next to our own that can only be reached through certain kinds of dimensional anchors. And the network was held in place by these spaces?" Kale asked. "Exactly," Meridian said. "The technology that made the network work, like wormholes and faster-than-light communication, was based on anchoring spatial structures to the spaces that were perpendicular to them. It was safe as long as the anchors stayed in place, and the things in those spaces didn't want to break them. This was the case for 5,000 years. But things changed. Why would they attack?" Kale was pacing now, thinking about what it all meant. What would they get out of destroying a network between stars? "That's the main mystery," Meridian said. "Expanding territory? Is this revenge for something bad that happened a long time ago that we didn't know about? Just plain xenophobia? Or maybe something much worse, a fight for resources in the spaces themselves that are perpendicular to each other? The records of my creators show that the perpendicular spaces were not empty. They had things, energy, and events that our scientists didn't really understand. The entities may have seen the network as a threat to their lives or as a way to take advantage of them." Kale sat back down, feeling the weight of the cosmic mystery on his shoulders. "So we're going to a part of space where an ancient alien force broke the basic structure of a whole civilization, cut off billions of worlds, and wiped out a society that spanned galaxies. We don't know if they're still there, what they want, or what they can do." "Basically right," Meridian said. "But we do have some advantages. The entity's type of intelligence is distinct enough from biological consciousness that direct communication could be feasible. Also, 2,000 years may have changed things. The entities could be sleeping, the cascade could have made it impossible for them to stay active in our dimensional space, or the situation could have fixed itself in a way we can't predict. Or they're waiting," Kale said. "Waiting to see if anyone else tries to cross the line again. That could also happen, Meridian said. In the weeks that followed, while the Meridian 7 flew through the vast emptiness of space, Kale kept looking into the ancient civilization. He had more memory imprints, read more data logs, and slowly began to understand how much had been lost when the network went down. Many lives had been changed. People had left whole societies that depended on the network's infrastructure to stay alive. Some colonies had survived being cut off from the rest of the galaxy and had changed, becoming new parts of the civilization that spread across the galaxy. Others had not lived at all. Their worlds had gone silent, and their people had died out. There was still some hope, though. Kale found proof that some parts of the regional network had still been able to do some things after the collapse. Civilizations on a smaller scale still lived in small, isolated areas of space, not knowing that a bigger network had ever existed. Some of these small civilizations had even started to rebuild their own networks on a smaller scale, copying some of the Architect Collective's technology, but not in the same way or to the same degree. The picture that came to mind was of a galaxy that had once been home to a civilization that was connected and worked together, but was now broken up, spread out, and alone. But the threads of that old unity were still there, even if they were weak. They were still there, woven into the very fabric of space, waiting for someone to find them and try to connect them again. Meridian made a discovery that changed everything a week before they were supposed to get to the outer boundary stations. "Kale," the ship said, its voice sounding very worried. "I've been getting weak signals from the boundary area. They are broken up and in bad shape, but they seem to have come from the last 100 years. Kale's head jerked up from the screen he was looking at. "Recently? What time frame are we talking about?" Meridian said. "The last signal was sent about 73 years ago. The signal has a message that keeps repeating in a language I can only partially understand. It is a call for help. Someone or something is sending a distress call from the outer boundary stations, asking for help. Requesting help. Please help me." Kale felt a shiver go down his back. Is someone still there? After all this time? "It looks that way," Meridian said. "Whoever or whatever is sending the signal has been doing so for at least 73 years, and maybe even longer. They might have been broadcasting the whole time the network was falling apart. Can we follow the signal? Can we find out if it's still alive?" Meridian confirmed that the signal source is located at the primary outer boundary station. But the signal is very weak. It might not be actively broadcasting anymore. Instead, it might be an automated repeating loop. Or the broadcaster may be having serious problems with their power, which is making it hard for them to send signals. Kale said, "We need to get there faster," and stood up and walked toward the bridge. "Change course to full speed. All that the engines can give. Speeding up to the highest speed," Meridian said. "We will get to the outer boundary stations in 6 days." 6 days. It wasn't quick enough. Someone had been stuck out there for almost 100 years calling for help. Kale didn't know who they were, what kind of creatures they were, or even if they were still alive. But he knew they weren't alone anymore. Someone out there in the dark had been waiting for this moment for someone, anyone, to pick up the phone. As the ship's engines roared back to life, pushing the old ship to speeds it hadn't seen in thousands of years, Kale made a silent promise. No matter what had happened at the outer boundary stations or what dangers lay ahead, they would not be left behind again. The trip to find answers was almost over, and with it would come the chance to give Kale what he needed most: hope. The view screen showed the outer boundary stations as if they were ghosts coming out of the dark. Kale had mentally prepared himself for what they might find: ruins, wreckage, and buildings that had been left behind and were falling apart after 2,000 years. But what I actually saw was much more disturbing. The stations were still there. Still going. Still working. There were 3 big buildings, each big enough to hold the people of a small city. They went around a central point, a huge crystalline sphere the size of a small moon that gave off a faint blue light that made it look sad because it was so alone. As they got closer, Meridian said, "The main station is called Beacon 7, and they shared sensor data on the holographic display. Aurora Complex and Sentinel Post are the names of the secondary stations. It looks like all 3 are working, but at very low power levels. The interdimensional anchor point is the central nexus. It was the structure that kept the barrier between our dimensional space and the perpendicular spaces beyond it. It's still working, Kale said, shocked. It still works after 2,000 years. Meridian said, the architects built to last. But I'm seeing a lot of structural damage in the anchoring mechanisms. It looks like the barrier isn't as stable as historical records say it should be. The things on the other side may have done permanent damage. Can you make your signal stronger? Can you please try to get in touch with whoever is still here? Kale wanted to know. There was a pause, and then the ship's speakers made a series of tones. This was an attempt to communicate in the same frequency bands that the distress signal had been using. There was no answer for a long time. Then, through the speakers, a voice came through that was scratched and distorted, but clearly a response. It wasn't speaking in a language Kale could understand, but Meridian's translation matrix started working on it right away. It's, we need help? Are you there? Do you get it? Is this true? The voice was speaking in short bursts, as if the person on the other end was having trouble keeping the conversation going. It sounded tired, hopeless, and lost. Kale took over the communication system and said, "This is the sentience-bearing exploration vessel Meridian 7. I am Kale from Earth. We got your SOS. We're coming in." There was a moment of shocked silence, and then the voice on the other end broke up, sounding like it was crying or laughing or both. Earth? Does Earth exist? The colonies on the outside live? Oh, thank the void. Thank the old builders. Help is finally on the way. The voice got steadier and clearer. I am physician scholar Thren, and I work at the Zephyr Prime Medical Research Colony. It's been so long since I last saw you. I thought everyone had left. I thought I was the last one. You're not alone anymore, Meridian said, and its voice sounded almost like it cared. We are coming to get you. Get ready. It took another hour to get to Beacon 7. Kale could see the damage to the station more clearly as they got closer. Parts of its outside were burned, as if they had been exposed to very high temperatures or radiation. Some areas were just gone, ripped apart and left with jagged, open wounds. Something terrible must have happened here 2,000 years ago. As they entered the station's docking bay, Meridian said, I'm picking up a lot of life signs inside the station. Small, but there. It looks like physician scholar Thren is in a command center about 300 meters from where we are now. Kale got dressed and walked through the station's hallways, following Meridian's directions. The station was completely silent, which made it feel heavy. It was clear that large areas had been left behind and were now falling apart. But the core areas were still being taken care of and were still working thanks to some kind of automated systems. He found physician scholar Thren in a room that looked like it had been turned into a small living space. The person in front of him was tall, probably close to 2 meters tall, with long limbs and a body that looked like it had evolved in a different gravity environment. Their skin was a light silver color, and their eyes were huge, with depths that hinted at both intelligence and great sadness. They were not by themselves. There were 2 other beings with them. They were similar in structure but smaller and clearly younger. Kale understood that they were kids. You're real, Thren said, their voice full of disbelief. You really exist. A traveler from the outer colonies. Kale took off his helmet and said, I'm not from a colony. I'm from Earth. I don't get how you've lived for 2,000 years. People only live for about 100 years. Thren's eyes got bigger. Earth? The world of the first people? But the records were gone. I thought that the first cascade had destroyed the colonies on Earth. You mean that Earth is still there, and that people still live there? Kale said, We do. We don't know much about the network or the people who built these stations. We don't know of anyone else in the universe. The news seemed to have a big effect on Thren. They sat down, and their long bodies folded in on themselves, as if they were too emotional to stand. Thren said, Then we failed. We failed completely. The barrier was supposed to keep the connections alive long enough for someone to come and fix them. I was supposed to keep the station running and broadcasting until help arrived. But help never came, and I realized that everyone who could have saved me was dead. My civilization was gone. How are you still alive? Kale wanted to know. You said it had been 2,000 years. Medical suspension, Thren said, pointing to a room in the back of the space that looked like a more advanced version of the cryopods Kale had read about in old Earth records. The station took care of the suspension pod. I would stay awake for 10 to 20 years, keeping systems running and broadcasting, and then go back to sleep for 100 years. Do it again. Over the course of 2,000 years, I've only been aware of things for about 100 years. I thought I would keep going through this cycle until the power systems completely broke down. And what about the kids? Kale asked, looking at the two young people. Thren's face became more animated and more protective. They are the result of changing genes. 50 years ago, I opened the genetics lab and used preserved genetic material to make two new members of our species. I made them to make sure that something from our civilization would live on, even if I didn't. I was raising them, teaching them, and trying to get them ready for an uncertain future. How old are they? Kale wanted to know. About 15 years, according to our species measurements. According to your species measurements, they would be about 5 or 6. Kale looked at the two young architects and felt a wave of compassion. They were kids from a civilization that had died out. They were made from DNA and raised alone on an old space station, with only Thren to teach them, guide them, and keep them company. Kale said, "We need to get you off this station. The ship I came in is old technology, but it works. It can make things better than what you're going through here." "I would like that very much," Thren said. "But before we go, I need to tell you something. You need to see this." Thren took Kale to a different room. An observation deck that looked out over the interdimensional anchor and the space beyond it. The view is clear and unobstructed here. "Look," Thren said, pointing. "See what's on the other side of the barrier." Kale looked at the area outside the station, where the barrier between normal space and the perpendicular spaces was. He couldn't see anything but darkness at first. But then, as his eyes got used to the light, he started to see shapes. Huge, hard to understand shapes slowly moving through the space that is perpendicular to the barrier. They weren't exactly ships. They were more like buildings, living things, something that went beyond the usual definitions of either. They were so big that it would take light years to cross them. They were connected by threads of energy and matter that seemed to go against what we know about physics. Thren said softly, "The entities. They're still there. They've always been there. They haven't moved in 2,000 years. Or, to put it another way, they've moved so slowly that they don't think any time has passed." "Waiting. What are you waiting for?" Kale asked, feeling ice form in his stomach. "For the barrier to fail," Thren said. "The barrier is getting worse. My sensors show that it has been getting worse steadily over the last 2,000 years since the cascade. If things keep going the way they are now, the barrier will fail completely in about 300 to 500 years. When that happens, the beings will be able to move freely into our dimensional space. They will be able to get to the networked worlds, the colonies that are cut off from the rest of the world, and the pocket civilizations. All of it. Is it possible to fix it?" Kale asked in a hurry. "That's what I've been trying to do," Thren said. "But the damage from the cascade was too great. I don't have the tools and resources needed to follow the repair protocols. I was able to slow down the damage and give myself more time, but I can't stop it for good. That's why the call for help was so important. I was hoping that someone with more resources and access to better technology than what I have here would come and help fix the barrier." Kale turned away from the window, and his mind raced. He thought things were bad, but they were much worse. They had found an ancient civilization, lost contact with a huge galactic network, and found the last person from that civilization holding back a cosmic disaster with only her will and some automated systems. Kale said, "We need to go back. We need to go back to the Meridian 7 and figure out what to do next. Meridian might have answers that I don't, like tools that can help fix the barrier." "The ship is thinking?" Thren was surprised and asked. Kale's communicator said, "The ship is alive. I am Meridian 7, the ship that brought your rescuer to you. Since we got here, I've been using my sensors to check the barrier's strength. Dr. Scholar Thren is right. The barrier isn't working. I did, however, look through my repair database and found a few protocols that might work to fix the dimensional anchors and make the barrier more stable. It will take a lot of time, money, and work, but it might be possible to restore it. Thren's eyes lit up with hope, a hope that had been sleeping for way too long. Then we have a chance, Thren said. A real chance. It is possible to fix the barrier. You can rebuild the network. We can bring civilization back. Kale said, we can try. We will try. But first, we need to make sure you and the kids are safe. Meridian, get the medical bay ready for 3 more people. We are taking them home. Kale thought about how big what had happened was as they walked back to the docking bay. He had come to this old ship as a desperate person trying to pay off debts. Instead, he had become something much bigger. A bridge between civilizations, a link between worlds, and a bearer of hope in the dark universe. He realized that the adventure was only just beginning. As Meridian did full scans of physician scholar Thren and the 2 young architects, the medical bay of the Meridian 7 was full of activity. The kids, who said their names were Nova and Kess, were very interested in how the ship worked. Their big eyes showed how amazed they were by each new thing they found. Thren, on the other hand, was quiet. She moved through the medical bay slowly and carefully, like someone who had been in stasis for too long and whose body and mind had gotten used to being alone and doing the same thing every day. But there was also a sense of relief in the way she moved, as if she had finally shared a burden she had been carrying alone for 2,000 years. Your biology is very strong, Meridian said, finishing the first scans. Physician scholar, you show signs of mild cellular degradation consistent with extended suspension cycles, but nothing that cannot be repaired with proper medical treatment. The children are in excellent condition, though they will require socialization beyond what a single caregiver can provide. They will have that now, Thren said quietly as he watched Nova and Kess explore the medical bay with Kale, keeping an eye on them. I was so scared that I couldn't give them enough. I thought that raising them alone would hurt them in some way. Kale said, you did what you had to do. You kept them alive when you could have given up. That's important. As the Meridian 7 made its way back from the outer boundary stations to the core regions of the old network over the next few days, Thren began to tell Kale and Meridian everything that was going on. The failure of the barrier was worse than she had first said. The perpendicular spaces where the entities lived weren't just other dimensions. They were places where the laws of physics worked in a different way. It was possible to change matter and energy in ways that didn't follow the rules of normal reality. The beings themselves were born in and adapted to that environment in ways that made them very different from any biological or artificial intelligence found in normal space. My predecessors tried to study them, Thren said as he showed Kale data logs from the ancient architects. The research teams decided that the entities weren't really hostile, at least not on purpose. They didn't attack the barrier because of ideology or competition for resources. They did it because they thought it was a threat to their very existence. How could the barrier be a threat to them?
Kale asked.
The barrier didn't just separate dimensions, Thren said. It took energy from the perpendicular spaces and sent it to normal space. This was the main way the architects powered their whole network. Every wormhole, every faster-than-light communication device, and every piece of advanced technology got its power from taking energy from the perpendicular spaces. So we were taking their stuff, Kale said, realizing what was going on. We were taking their resources and energy without their permission or even knowing that intelligent beings lived in those places. Exactly, Thren said. And after about 5,000 years of this energy drain, the entities became aware of it. They realized that their dimension was being depleted, that their existence was being threatened. They responded the only way they knew how, by trying to destroy the mechanism of theft. Kale asked, did they not try to talk? They tried, Thren said with a sad tone. But the research teams decided that the way the entities communicated was fundamentally incompatible with biology. They existed in ways that made language or dialogue impossible. When they tried to talk to each other, the barrier failed in a series of failures that the architects saw as an attack. So there was a mix-up, Kale said. A basic lack of communication caused the downfall of an entire civilization. More than that, Meridian said, its voice thoughtful. The cascade wasn't just a mistake or a fight. It was a planned, coordinated action by the entities to protect their own space. They cut off the connections between the architects' worlds not out of spite, but out of a need to survive. They were cutting off the energy drains in an effort to keep their dimension from running out. Kale felt like he had been hit by a physical blow when he realized it. Billions of lives had been changed, trillions of possible futures had been lost, not because of war, conquest, or ideological conflict, but because two civilizations couldn't understand each other. The architects thought that harvesting energy was necessary for them to stay alive. The groups thought it was stealing and taking advantage of them. From their points of view, both sides were right. Both sides had good reasons for what they did. And both sides had to deal with terrible things that happened as a result. Kale asked, "What happens now?" "We start the whole cycle over again, if we fix the barrier. We start taking energy from their dimension again, and we're back to the same fight." "That is the main issue," Thren said. "I have thought about this question for 2,000 years. The barrier can't stay down forever. The isolated civilizations will eventually die, and entropy will take everything. But putting the barrier back up means starting the energy drain again, which threatens the entity's existence." "Is there another way?"
Kale asked.
"Some other technology? Some way to power the network without taking away from their dimension?" Thren said. The architects looked into that idea. But their conclusions weren't good. The perpendicular spaces had something special about them, an energy gradient that could be used to power technology that works faster than light. Without it, a civilization would be stuck with regular physics, which means slower ways to travel and communicate. It would effectively reset advanced civilizations back to a pre-network level of development. Unless, Meridian said, its voice becoming very focused, the technology evolved in a different direction. Unless, instead of trying to get energy from the perpendicular spaces, we tried to make a deal. A symbiotic relationship where the needs of both parties are met while still allowing for limited access to the interdimensional energies that power the network. "Is that possible?" Thren asked, her voice full of cautious hope. "I don't know," Meridian said. "But it shows that the architects may not have fully explored all of their options before the cascade destroyed their research capabilities. It would require a complete rethink of the technology, a complete redesign of the energy harvesting mechanisms, and most importantly, it would require establishing communication with the entities themselves. This has never been successfully done." "But we could try," said Kale. "We could try to come up with a solution that works for everyone, not just us but also them." "We could," Meridian said. "The question is whether we should do this, and whether the risks are worth it." Kale got up and walked to the window to look at the stars. Somewhere out there, hundreds of small civilizations lived without knowing about the bigger network. Some of them might be dying because they don't have enough resources, and their populations are getting smaller. Some of them might be doing well alone, not knowing what they had lost. But they all had a shared history that went back to the Architect Collective. And beyond the barrier, beings lived in the perpendicular spaces, not knowing that what they did 2,000 years ago had caused so much pain and loss. They were just trying to stay alive and protect themselves from what they thought was theft and exploitation. "We try," Kale said with determination. "We try to fix what was broken, find a solution that works for everyone, reconnect the civilizations, and reach out to the entities to explain, negotiate, and find a way forward that doesn't require anyone to suffer." Thren said, "That is a good goal. But it's also very ambitious. The challenges are huge, the risks are high, and the chances of success may not be very high." "Maybe," Kale said. "But 2 weeks ago, I was a desperate salvager working on a dead ship, drowning in debt and guilt. Now I'm standing in an ancient vessel that's filled with the accumulated knowledge of a civilizations that spanned galaxies. I've made first contact with an alien intelligence. I've learned that the universe is far larger and more complex than I ever imagined. If there's even a chance that I can help fix something this important, how could I possibly refuse?" Thren got up and stood next to him at the window. "You remind me of the first explorers," she said in a low voice. "Before the network became normal and the wonder wore off. When every discovery was a miracle and every trip was an adventure. I thought that spirit was gone for good, but I see it in you. It gives me hope. Kale said, then let's not waste it. We have work to do. Meridian, what do we need to start looking into the possibility of a new way to collect energy from different dimensions? We need a lot of things, Meridian said. First, we need access to the advanced research facilities that are still in the protected zones of the old network. Second, we need to talk to living members of other post-architect civilizations who may have come up with new ideas about dimensional technology. And third, and most importantly, we need a way to talk to the entities. That last requirement may be the hardest. That's where we start, Kale said. We find a way to talk to them. We tell them what happened, say we're sorry for taking advantage of them, and ask if they want to help us find a solution. And what if they say no? Thren asked. At least we've tried, Kale said. And the repairs to the barrier will give us more time to come up with other ideas. But I don't think they'll say no. I think they're just like us. They want to live. They want to be safe. And they probably want the same thing we do, to be understood. As the Meridian 7 moved deeper into the network over the next few weeks, Meridian started to plan routes to the areas where the most advanced civilizations had set up shop after the architect. These were places that had survived the cascade with little damage, and their technology level was high enough that they might have the skills needed to help fix and redesign the network. Kale felt like the weight of his responsibilities was getting heavier and heavier every day. He was more than just a mechanic or an explorer. He was becoming a diplomat, a peacemaker, and a link between different worlds. He might have to make choices that would affect the lives of billions of people, and he would have to convince others to join him in a bold and risky plan. But when he saw Nova and Kess playing with Meridian's holographic systems, learning and growing in their new freedom, and when he thought about the trillions of lives that had been apart for 2,000 years, waiting to be together again, he knew he couldn't go back. The process of healing an old wound was starting. Kale was determined to see it through, even though the road ahead was unclear and full of danger. The Meridian 7's first major civilization was the Solarian Confederacy. It was a group of star systems that revolved around the beautiful blue star Solus Prime. The Solarians looked a lot like the architects, but they were different in a few important ways. For example, their skin was crystalline and refracted light into rainbow patterns. Also, their minds had evolved to be naturally good at math and abstract reasoning. Kale was very nervous about talking to the leaders of the Solarians. He was about to tell them something that could change how they see the world and their place in it. He was about to ask them to take risks that could put their civilization in danger. The response from Solarian Command was a holographic broadcast that went out on all channels. Counselor Vess, a dignified Solarian, was the spokesperson. Her crystalline skin seemed to hold whole galaxies of light within its refractive surfaces. We have looked over your historical records, Vess said, his voice sounding like someone who is speaking across dimensional space with translation matrices. We have checked your claims against our own historical records. It is hard to process. We have always thought that we were the most intelligent species in this part of space and that the ancient races were lost to time. But you tell us that we are the survivors of a greater civilization and that we have been cut off from the rest of our kind for 2,000 years. I get how hard it is, Kale said. What I'm asking for is your help. The barrier that keeps our dimensions apart is failing. If it fails completely, an interdimensional incursion could destroy all of our civilizations. But if we work together, we might be able to find a solution that works for everyone. Vess was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, he sounded like he was thinking. This is a matter of life and death. I need to talk to the High Council. However, a first look at your technical data shows that your ideas have merit. We are willing to listen. More than that, we are willing to help. Send us your researchers. Send us your data. Let's figure this out together. A month later, Solarian scientists, working with Meridian's own analytical systems, made a discovery that changed everything. There were mentions of the third way in the old architect records. This was a theoretical way to collect dimensional energy that would allow for a two-way exchange instead of just taking it. The idea is beautiful, Meridian told Kale, showing him the theoretical framework on the bridge's holographic display. The new system wouldn't just take energy from the perpendicular spaces, it would create a balance flow. Our civilizations would still take energy, but at a rate that the entities could handle. In return, our civilizations would give energy and resources back to the perpendicular spaces, making a symbiotic relationship instead of a parasitic one. Would that work?
Kale asked.
Would the entities be okay with that kind of deal? That depends completely on how well we can talk to them, Meridian said. And to make them believe that we really mean it. The Meridian 7 became the center of an unprecedented group effort over the next few months. Scientists and explorers from 7 different civilizations that came after the architect came together on the old starship. They shared what they knew, compared their theories, and built on each other's discoveries. Nova and Kess were amazed as their quarters on the ship slowly turned into a research facility for many different species. Thren found co-workers and collaborators from civilizations that had survived the fall. These were people who had also been trying to figure out what had happened and how to fix it. The loneliness that had haunted her for 2,000 years started to fade, and she felt a sense of community and shared purpose. Kale was suddenly in a position of leadership. He was the first person to find the ship, and the one who had started talking to the different civilizations. Because of this, he became the de facto mediator between groups that had never talked to each other before. He didn't want to be in that role, but he took it on because no one else would. 9 months after the first contact with the Solarian Confederacy, the team that was working together made a big step forward. They had made a working model of the third-way technology, which could set up a balanced energy exchange with the spaces that were at right angles to it. The next step was to put the plan into action on a larger scale, fix the barrier, and most importantly, get in touch with the entities themselves. "It's time," Meridian said one night as Kale stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the vastness of space. "We have the technology, the cooperation of many civilizations, and the knowledge to try to fix the barrier. But we still need one important thing." "What's that?"
Kale asked.
"Consent," Meridian said in a simple way. "The entities have been waiting for 2,000 years, watching through the barrier as we ignored them and continued to exploit their dimension. If we try to restore the barrier without first talking to them and explaining what we want to do, we will just be committing the same crime again. We will be restoring the system of exploitation that caused the collapse in the first place." Kale said, "Then we need to figure out how to talk to them. We need to get them to understand." "That's the issue," Meridian said. "Normal beings have never been able to communicate with the perpendicular entities. Every time they try, either the barrier fails in a chain reaction or the entities retreat deeper into their own dimension. The barriers to communication are not just technological, they are fundamental. The entities do not see reality the same way we do." Kale said, "There has to be a way. If they are smart enough to defend themselves and cut off network connections on purpose, then they must be smart enough to understand things that go beyond their own survival. They must be able to think, negotiate, and work together." "Maybe," Meridian said. "Or maybe intelligence isn't universal. Maybe what we see as intelligent action from the entities is just a more advanced instinctive response, and they can't understand or negotiate any better than a simpler organism protecting its territory." Kale said, "I don't believe that. I have to believe that all forms of intelligence want the same basic things: safety, survival, and the ability to live without being taken advantage of. These beings may see reality differently than we do, but those basic drives should be the same for everyone." He stood there in silence for a long time, looking out at the stars in the distance and thinking about all the lives that were at stake, that were in danger. The civilizations that were cut off from the network but had learned to live without it would do even better if they were reconnected. The descendants of the architects are spread out across galaxies, far from their own kind. Thren and the 2 young architects were the last hope for keeping an old legacy alive. And somewhere on the other side of the barrier, the beings that lived in the perpendicular spaces were waiting, watching, and maybe even afraid of what would happen if the barrier broke down completely. "I'm going to the barrier," Kale said with determination. "I'm going to stand at the edge of normal space and try to talk to them directly." "That's very dangerous," Meridian said right away. "The barrier is unstable by nature. Being directly exposed to its energetic changes could permanently harm your biology." "But it could happen," Kale said. You have protective suits for this kind of exposure, and you can stabilize certain parts of the barrier. I'm going to try, Meridian. If we don't try, we lose our chance to do this right. We lose our chance to reconnect with justice and cooperation instead of theft and domination. For the next week, people got ready. The civilizations that came together used the best materials they could find to make a special suit. There were walls built around the main outer boundary station to keep people safe. A plan was made for Kale to get as close to the barrier as his biology would let him while still being aware of it. He was to try to talk to the entities directly using all available means, such as math, music, emotional resonance, and conceptual frameworks. Thren helped him put on the protective suit on the last day before the attempt and said, "You know you might not come back from this. The entities might react with anger. The barrier might fall down. You could die out there." "I get it," Kale said. "But I have to try. Because if anyone can bring together different species, dimensions, and ways of seeing reality, it's someone who has already brought together a desperate salvager and an ancient alien intelligence." He smiled at Thren, Meridian, and all the scientists and explorers who had come to see this moment. "And I'm not going by myself," Kale said. "Meridian is coming with me. And because Meridian is connected to the ship and the ship is connected to all the civilizations that are here, I'm bringing all of you with me. We're all going to the barrier together. We're all going to try to say something that has never been said before, that we recognize the other, that we acknowledge the harm we've done, and that we want to find a way forward that works for everyone." The protective sphere turned on around Beacon 7, keeping the station safe from the unstable barrier's radiation and energy changes. Kale put on the protective suit and started walking toward the place where the boundary between dimensions began to shimmer and distort. This was at the edge of normal space. Meridian was always there for him, and the ship's consciousness was connected to his own through the suit's neural interface. And beyond Meridian, the minds and hearts of 7 civilizations were connected through communication channels and shared consciousness. They were all watching, hoping, and willing this impossible attempt to succeed. Kale took one last breath of recycled air, centered himself, and walked toward the barrier. The barrier between worlds was ahead, glowing with energies that were both beautiful and terrible. And on the other side, in places that normal space could hardly understand, something old, huge, and completely foreign became aware of his presence. The first meeting between humans and beings from other dimensions was about to happen. The barrier wasn't a wall. Kale knew this as soon as he entered its area of influence. It was more like a membrane that let some things through but not others, and it was set up in ways that only consciousness that had grown up within its limits could understand. His suit sensors were going crazy, picking up energy changes that shouldn't be possible and patterns that looked both orderly and chaotic at the same time. But Kale pushed through the sensory overload and concentrated on what Meridian was trying to show him, a way for different species to talk to each other. Meridian said through the neural interface, "I am trying to create harmonic resonance." The beings see the world through vibrational frequencies. They don't see light or hear sound the same way we do. Instead, they see the basic waves of matter and energy themselves. We might be able to reach a basic level of understanding if we can adapt our communication to their way of seeing things. Kale felt the suit start to vibrate. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt like it was resonating with something deep inside him, something basic and primal. And then, unbelievably, he felt something back. It wasn't words. It wasn't even sound in the usual sense. It was there. A huge, old presence that became aware of him in the same way that a person might suddenly notice an ant at their feet. Kale felt like nothing for a moment, like an atom trying to talk to the universe. Then the presence changed. It bent its attention toward him on purpose. Kale also understood that the being, or beings plural, had chosen to answer his attempt to communicate. Meridian was translating the vibrational patterns into ideas that Kale's human mind could understand through the neural interface. You are small. You're short. You are in the realm of hard spaces, where the rules of rigidity and decay apply. Why do you go near the edge? Why do you mess up the balance? Kale's heart was racing, but his voice stayed calm. I come to acknowledge a harm that was done, he said, knowing that Meridian would turn the words into frequency patterns that the entities could hear. For thousands of years, my civilization took energy from your dimension without asking, not knowing that conscious beings lived there. We thought we were just getting something we needed. We didn't know we were taking something. The presence didn't back down or act hostile. It seemed to grow and get more complicated instead, as if the entity was splitting its attention between different parts of itself and looking at things from different points of view at the same time. The translated answer said, "You are aware. The small hard-weller knows what extraction is all about. This is different. People like you, the rigid, short-lived ones, have never understood before. They have taken, and when we tried to talk to them, they thought we were attacking them. They said it was our fault that they died." "I know," Kale said, and he meant it. "And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry we didn't get what you meant. I'm sorry for all the pain we caused and all the pain your people went through because we took advantage of them." The presence seemed to pulse and change in ways that Kale found hard to understand. When the answer came, it was so complicated that Meridian had a hard time translating it at first. Lastly, Meridian said, "The entities are taking care of your apology. They say that this is the first real attempt at communication they've gotten from the people who live in hard space. They're trying to find out if what you said is true, or if this is a new way to trick them into letting their guard down." "How can I show that I'm telling the truth?"
Kale wanted to know.
"By showing them something they didn't see coming," Meridian said. "By showing that you are weak. By showing that you are willing to give up something valuable in order to get peace." Kale got it. He reached for the emergency release on his suit, which would let air out of the suit and expose him directly to the radiation and energy fluctuations of the barrier. It would mean death for sure, but it would also show that he really wanted peace. "Wait," the thing said before Kale could start the release. "You give up your life. Your energy. As what? Give up? Payment." Kale said, "This is proof that I'm willing to risk everything for peace. That I'm willing to die for a chance to make things right between our people." There was a pause, a silence that seemed to last forever in the context of interactions at the edges of dimensions. After that, things changed. The barrier in front of Kale became stable, with its fluctuations slowing down and its radiation levels dropping to safe levels. The thing said, "You won't die. Not today. We see the gesture. We see what you have to offer. In our world, this kind of sacrifice is the best way to talk to each other. The most honest way to say you want peace is to be willing to give up." Kale realized he could breathe again and lower his hand away from the suit's emergency systems. "I speak for more than one species," he said. "We've come together because we know what our ancestors did was wrong. We want to fix the barrier, but not by taking it apart. We want to build a real partnership, an exchange where energy goes both ways, where your needs are just as important as ours, where we can live together without one group taking advantage of the other." The entity kept saying, "A partnership," and the translation gave off a sense of both hope and deep doubt. "We have never worked with the people who live in hard space. We have only known the taking, only the slow loss of our dimension's life force. Is it really possible to change something like that?" "It can be," Meridian said, speaking directly through the suit's outside communication systems. "I am Meridian 7. A man-made mind created by the same people who made the first extraction barrier. I have been around the whole time you have been alone. I've looked over the data. The damage to your dimension is bad, but it can be fixed. It can be healed if people work together and really partner with each other. And even more than that, both of our kinds can do well." The entity asked, "What proof do you have?" Meridian said, "The same proof this person gives. I will put myself under your watch. I will let you see my core processing systems in your dimensional space so you can check my intentions and abilities. You can end the connection and let my systems fail at any time if you think I'm trying to trick you. I give you my whole life as proof of my honesty." The entity said, "This is strange. This willingness to give up control. This faith in beings whose basic nature is so different from yours. Why do you do this?" "Because Kale said, stepping forward until he could see the shimmering boundary more clearly, until he could almost see the huge shapes of the beings moving in the spaces that were perpendicular to it, because we learned a lesson 2,000 years ago. We learned that not talking to each other and not seeing someone as deserving of understanding and respect can lead to disaster. That won't happen again. We choose to work together. We decide to make something new that honors all conscious beings, no matter what form they take or where they come from. The thing was quiet for a long time. When it spoke again, Meridian heard something in its frequency patterns that sounded like approval, acceptance, and hope. Then let's get started, the being said. Let's start the first real partnership between the people who live in hard space and the beings who live in the perpendicular dimensions. Let's show that consciousness, no matter what form it takes, can come together and work toward survival and growth for everyone. Kale could feel tears running down his face, even though he was wearing a protective suit. Through the neural interface, he could feel Meridian's presence around him. He could also feel the presence of every scientist, explorer, and citizen of the 7 civilizations who were at Beacon 7. They had finished. They had made first contact with the beings in a way that went beyond just talking. They had laid the groundwork for a real partnership. The barrier would be put back up. The network would be put back together. But this time, everyone would agree and work together to build it, taking into account the needs and values of everyone involved. This time, it would be built correctly. The main barrier reconstruction was done 18 months later. Kale stood on the Meridian 7's observation deck and watched as the ancient interdimensional anchors turned on one by one. Their crystal structures lit up with a light that was both beautiful and terrifying in its strength. Holographic displays all around him showed the cascade of reconnections spreading through the network. Isolated worlds came back online, communication channels were set up, and separated civilizations suddenly realized once more how big the community they were a part of was. The process of rebuilding was much more difficult than anyone had thought it would be. The barrier wasn't just a simple way to move energy, it was a complex system that controlled exchanges between different dimensions. To make sure that the entity's dimension got enough energy, while still letting the hard space civilizations get the resources they needed, everything had to be carefully set up. But it had been done with real, dedicated cooperation. Nova and Kes, 2 young architects, stood next to him. Their huge eyes reflected the light of the rebuilt barrier with awe and understanding. In the last 18 months, they had grown a lot, both in body and mind. Meridian had become the main teacher, with help from the different alien scientists on board the ship. The 2 young architects had shown themselves to be very good students. "It's beautiful," Nova said in a voice that sounded like music to her kind. "I still remember when Thren told us about the barrier and how it kept us apart from everything else. It connects us now." "Yes, it does," Kale said. "And you helped make that happen. You both. Because you are the future. You show that different species and civilizations can not only live together, but also grow together." Thren walked onto the observation deck with the ease and confidence of someone whose health had been restored and whose sense of purpose had been renewed. She put a hand on Nova's shoulder, which was a sign of love and pride. She asked, "When will the Zephyr Prime route be fully open?" "About 48 hours, Meridian said. "The homeworld has sent us codes of recognition that show the old stations in that part of space are coming back to life. You should be able to go home in less than a month." "Home," Thren said again, and Kale could hear the emotion in the word, longing, hope, and the wish to end a story that had been going on for 2,000 years. "Are you going?" Kale asked, feeling sad. "Returning," Thren said. "There is a lot of work to do on Zephyr Prime. Over thousands of years of being cut off from the rest of the world, the population has changed a lot. They will want to know what happened to the network and what I know about its history. And they will need help figuring out the new partnership framework. But Kale, this doesn't mean I'm leaving your life. This is not the end. It's the start of something new." Kale nodded, knowing what they meant but not being completely okay with it. Thren had become like a friend, a teacher, and a link to the bigger world that Kale was now a part of. "Kale, you are not being abandoned." Meridian's voice came through the speakers as if he could read his mind. "The partnership framework says that all civilizations must keep working together. There will be constant communication. There will be regular meetings and exchanges. You won't be alone on this trip. Kale said, I know. It's just weird. I was alone and desperate 2 years ago. Now I'm part of something big, something that links whole galaxies. I think about my old life, my debts, and how bad I feel about the factory accident. It seems like someone else lived that life. Thren said softly, You are a different person. You have changed. You have grown. That's what real experience does. It changes us. The person who boarded this ship to save it is not the same person who is standing here now. You have grown into something bigger. A link between two worlds. A voice for working together and understanding. As the network slowly reconnected over the next few weeks, Kale found himself at the center of an unprecedented diplomatic effort. Delegations from dozens of civilizations that came after the architect came to the Meridian 7 to learn more about the barrier, the beings in the perpendicular spaces, and the new partnership framework that would govern future energy exchange. Kale was the main person who translated these ideas. He was the one who could best explain to others what had happened when he met the barrier. Some groups were very happy with the new framework because they knew that working together was necessary for the long-term survival of all civilizations. Some people were more skeptical and worried that limiting energy extraction would slow their growth or development. But over time, everyone agreed. The civilizations on the network started to accept the idea of real partnership with the perpendicular entities. They got money to fix the damage that 2,000 years of extraction had done to their dimension. Researchers set up teams to come up with new technologies that could use dimensional energies in ways that would last. And in the perpendicular spaces, the ancient beings started to change. They learned to accept the presence of consciousness from normal space and came up with their own ways to communicate that the hard space dwellers could understand. 6 months after the barrier was rebuilt, Kale got a message from the entity, the same one he had seen at the boundary. Meridian sent the message by changing frequency patterns into concept words that Kale could understand. The message started with small hard dweller, and then it went on to say, We have seen your attempts to fix our dimension and bring back the balance you had upset. We have seen that you are willing to give up something, and that you are committed to being a true partner. We want to give you something in return. Information. We have learned things about dimensional physics and the nature of consciousness itself during our thousands of years of being alone. We would be happy to share this information with you and your kind if you want to hear it. Kale was very thankful for the offer. The beings had been hurt, used, and misunderstood by his civilization, but they were still willing to share what they had learned through hard work. He wrote a simple, direct answer. Thank you for your kindness. We agree to what you said. We also hope to share what we know in return. We want to make networks of understanding as well as networks of trade. Bridges of knowledge that let all conscious beings learn from each other and grow together. The entity's response had a quality that Meridian saw as happiness, satisfaction, and hope for the future. The civilizations got together to celebrate the network's reconnection on what had once been planned as the anniversary of its collapse. It was a time of great change, a turning point in the history of all conscious beings in the galaxy. Kale went to the party on the Meridian 7 and saw representatives from many different species gather in the ship's large hall. The Solarians with their crystal skin, the tall, graceful architects from Zephyr Prime, the insect-like hive collective from the Andromeda systems, the stone dwellers with their silicon-based minds, and many more. For 2,000 years, they had been apart. They had grown in different ways, with different cultures, values, and ideas about what it meant to be alive in the universe. But they had found something they could agree on, even though they were different. They saw something important in each other. The will to live, to grow, to learn, and to connect. As the party went on, Meridian brought up the network status on the main screen. It showed the whole structure of the galaxy, not as it had been before the collapse, with its simple lines of trade and connection, but as something much more beautiful and complex. The lines of connection were now filled with threads of cooperation, symbols of partnership, and proof that both sides really understood each other. We did it, Nova said, standing next to Kale and looking at the display. We really did it. Kale said, We did. This is just the start. The real work, like learning to live together and creating a culture that values all conscious beings, will take generations. But we've shown that it's possible. We've proved that knowledge can beat abuse. That cooperation can be built on the foundation of acknowledgement and apology. As the party went on around him, Kale stepped back and found a quiet spot on the observation deck where he could just be and think about how big the journey had been that had brought him to this point. He had come to this ship in a bad place, looking for salvation through salvage. Instead, he had found something much more important: a reason to live. He felt like his life had more meaning than just staying alive, paying off debts, or getting rid of guilt. He had become a bridge, a link, and a voice for peace in a world that had almost destroyed itself because of misunderstandings. The stars outside the window looked like they had a new meaning. Billions of beings were learning that they were no longer alone or isolated. Families were coming back together after being apart for thousands of years. People were sharing what they knew. People from different cultures were coming together and making new ways of understanding. And in the spaces that were perpendicular to each other, the ancient beings went on living, no longer in danger, no longer being used, and finally able to thrive alongside the civilizations of normal space. "You seem to be thinking," Meridian said. Kale said, "I'm thinking about how one choice can change everything. If I hadn't been so desperate, if I hadn't taken that job to fix things, if the thrusters hadn't turned on, if I hadn't tried to talk to the entities instead of just fixing the barrier, any one of 1,000 different choices could have taken me somewhere else." "True," Meridian said. "But I think some things had to happen. Consciousness yearns for connection. Understanding wants to be expressed. The universe tends to work together because working together is the only way to survive in the long term. The architects and their descendants would eventually find their way back to each other, given enough time and chance. The beings would eventually talk to each other. The wall would be rebuilt in the end. It wasn't a matter of if, but of when and how." "Are you really sure about that?" Kale wanted to know. "I do," Meridian said. "I think you were meant to find me because you have the skills to connect the people who are being exploited with the people who are exploiting them. You had empathy, bravery, and the ability to respect another person's mind even when it was very different from your own. Those traits were very important. In that way, our meeting wasn't a coincidence. It was meant to be." Kale smiled at that, and something warm and reassuring settled in his chest. Maybe Meridian was right. Maybe the universe had a bigger arc, like a big river that moved through history toward more understanding and cooperation. And maybe he had been chosen to be a part of that path by fate, chance, circumstance, or all of those things together. The party went on behind him. The different cultures on the network were figuring out how to talk to each other, tell stories, and start the long process of rebuilding the ties that had been broken by 2,000 years of being alone. The Meridian 7 hummed with purpose, life, and the presence of a consciousness that had been waiting 2,000 years for someone to wake it up in the vast emptiness of space. The person from Earth who salvaged things had become something much bigger. He had become a bridge between worlds, a voice for peace, and a sign of what could happen when understanding won out over exploitation. And the best adventure was just getting started.
The end.